I'm not sure how long I could outlast John Wick running, but
Nobody can. He'll find you. Welcome back to the podcast. You're in the team room with the ones ready, just one of me. But we have the mad scientist, Taylor Starch. I'm here to get starched. And this is going to be kind of like a continuation. But I know that you're upset about, and to clear it up, everyone, Taylor has gone out and you have gotten a mic.
I mean, I'd like to take this moment to apologize to absolutely no one because the king is back, baby. The king is back. No, in all seriousness, like I was shocked. I had just got like some Gucci, some headphones. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna sound like a real podcaster. Finally have some nice headphones. And I just listened back and I was like, oh shoot. Those were returned promptly back to Amazon with a little fun note. So yeah, I've got what the kids call a streaming mic. So hopefully I'm now hip enough. Hopefully you guys can hear me. So yeah, no apologies. But I feel like I should give like, I don't know. So it's kind of like one of those where a lot of what I was trying to say got cut out, but I feel like I can sum it up pretty quickly if that's I feel like that's where we should kind of start, is where we left off.
Please do.
Okay, so if you didn't listen to the last podcast, like half of it, like Big Rehab does not want this information to come out. I am convinced that Big Rehab is going to freak out because you guys are going to start throwing away your foam rollers. You're going to start getting rid of all. Anyway, so what we were talking about is running, and how when it comes to running, the biggest thing we have to understand is it's not necessarily about weak glutes or knee valgus or overpronation, that it's a lot about capacity and demands. So we have the demands we place on our body, which are the biomechanical loads. And then we have the capacity to handle those demands, which is basically our tissue tolerance. Now, the top two ways that people are going to get injured running is because they have training load errors, or errors in the training load where they spike intensity, they spike volume, and that's going to show up with a little bit of delay. Sometimes we see that 4 to 10 weeks after the training load error. So someone will start spamming some intervals, boom, they get injured. So training load errors, once again, is the number one way people are going to get injured from running. So if you're making those errors in your program, you're going to constantly be getting injured, and no amount of foam rolling, stretching, strength training is going to be able to fix that. Now, the second thing is the capacity side, which is your body's ability to handle force, to absorb force. And that's what we really got started talking about, is how we go about tissue-specific strength training. So when most people go in the gym, they think, I'm going to do legs, which is awesome. We know some people are going to break it up, like I'm going to do some squats, some hinges, or some pushes and pulls. That's not wrong. That's how we've all been taught. Maybe alternate an upper body pull or push with a lower body hinge or squat. That's all good stuff. But you're thinking about going into the gym and training sets and reps. When I go into the gym, I'm thinking about tissue adaptations. So I'm thinking about, is today not just a leg day, but am I training my joint space today? Am I training my connective tissue today, which is tendons, which we'll hop right into in a second? Am I training muscular inputs? Am I training my nervous system? So that's kind of a perspective change when it comes to what you're trying to do in the gym. So strength training should be about adaptations, not demonstrations of strength. So when you're going into the gym, you're supposed to expand your limits. And when people get injured, they tend to make a really poor mistake. So they hurt their knee, or they blow out their back, or they get shin splints, and they say, uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. And they stop training the thing that's hurting them, or they stop running, or they stop deadlifting. And they basically, what they do is they decrease the demands. The body starts to feel better because you're basically modifying the symptoms. And then as that happens over the course of a few weeks or a few months, your body actually loses capacity in the long run. And then you return to the same thing you're doing, whether that was running or whether that was deadlifting. And then you get re-injured again, and you wonder why. That's the vicious cycle of rehab. And the reason why the number one predictor of injury is going to be you've had the injury before. So if you've had a stress fracture, 1 in 3 runners are going to get another bone stress injury. If you've had patellofemoral pain or IT band pain, you're probably going to get it again. So what does that tell us? We suck at rehabbing these because people just try to get pain to go away. Now, Let's be honest. If you're in pain, you can't really load muscles and joints very much because it hurts, right? If your shoulder hurts and you try benching, I mean, isn't that every time people go to the bench? But you get my point. If you're in pain, you can't really load very much. So, of course, we want to decrease pain. So, I'm not saying foam rolling is the worst, even though it is. I'm not saying you can't get a dry needle. I'm not saying you can't take an ice bath. But once again, those things aren't specific for the tissue. So, an ice bath doesn't increase bone density. So, if you have a bone issue, you need a bone solution. So we have different tissues in the body: connective tissue, muscular tissue, nervous system, joint tissue. And what we do is we have different issues for different tissues. And so we need different solutions. But most people have a one size fits all approach. They get shin splints, they stop running, they start cycling, they throw in some calf raises, it feels better. And there's the vicious story. So I know that was about a couple minutes, but hopefully if you tried making it through the last podcast, that is a lot of what we talked about. And right towards the tail end, we started to talk about a lot more about the connective tissue. And I think that's where we can hop in. But hopefully, does that make sense, what I just kind of went over?
Yeah, it did. That was actually a really good overview and pretty succinct too. And I marked because that's going to be one of those is going to be a really good reel talking about different or different issues for different tissues, and then the amount of load. And then the last one you had talked about the 80% rule where people are training for 80% of their capacity, and then they can never recover from it, and then they continuously get injured and all that kind of stuff.
That's why in our podcast where we talked about recovery, I said the best recovery tool is a good training program that is within your capacities, that's expanding them. Because yeah, there's nothing wrong with testing your limits and pushing your limits, but if your training program is trash, no amount of foam rolling, ice baths, NSAIDs, dry needling, scraping, taping, cupping, all that magic, it's not going to fix your shins. You can throw as much passive recoveries at it. If your training program is unsustainable, eventually your body will fight back. And then you will have to sell your performance to get back your health. I've said that before.
Yep.
So the biggest thing to understand is when most people have an injured area, they are taught the worst thing in the planet, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation. So they rest it. We'll get into that in a second. They ice it, they compress it, and then they elevate it. Now, the guy who said that, we don't even need to go into it, but rice is not even valid anymore for most things. Okay. So let's talk about the different tissues, because this is huge. Because if you don't have the right solution, you're going to get an answer, but it's not necessarily the one you want. I like to think I sucked at math. I was good at exercise physiology, trash at math. There was a lot of times in math class where you do all the work for a problem, you get an answer, and you'd be like, sweet. You look down at answer A, B, C, D, E.
None of them.
Not even remotely close. And then you're kind of sitting there, you redo your work, and you get an answer, and you're like, wait a second. That's a lot of strength and conditioning, where just because you do sets and reps doesn't mean you got the tissue adaptation you want to. Now, you might have completed the sets and reps you wanted to, but doing sets and reps doesn't give you a magical adaptation. If so, every single person in the gym that worked out would be stronger, faster, better. There's people at Gold's Gym that look the same, and they've been training for the past 5 years. They're not any stronger. They're not any faster. Their joint health is worse. So just because you do stuff doesn't mean you necessarily get the answer. Now, the reason why it seems everything works is we have something called the internet, and we have people sharing stuff every day. And here's the truth. If you're weak, if you're immobile, if you have poor quality connective tissue, if you have a low absolute strength, if you're untrained, everything works. Everything. So that's why someone will be like, well, I had knee pain and I did these knees over toe squats and I felt better. It's like, well, yeah, you're weak. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Anything would have worked. You could have watched Con Air with Nicolas Cage and taken a salt bath with magnesium salt and listened to like Frank Sinatra, and it would have worked. Now, that sounds really mean, but you have to understand, a lot of people say, well, I tried X, Y, and Z and it worked for me. I'm thrilled. But just because you get out of pain doesn't mean you caused a successful tissue adaptation. And I think what will help explain that is when we talk about connective tissue, and I'll bring it back.
Okay, let's do it.
So in our body is connective tissue. Okay. When you do a like cadaver lab and you cut it open, you have the red tissue, which is the muscular stuff, and the white stuff is kind of the connective tissue that wraps around, and it's how muscle pulls and creates force, right? So the muscle is going to pull against the connective tissue, which stiffens, and that allows us to produce force. I want you to think of good quality connective tissue like a climbing rope. So when you pull against the climbing rope, it stiffens, and that allows you to produce force. Poor quality connective tissue is like a trash bag. So I want you to picture if you and I were on a tug of war with a climbing rope, when we pull, that would stress stiffen, and that would be awesome. That's healthy connective tissue. So I want you to picture now if you and I were doing a tug of war with a plastic bag. That's poor quality connective tissue. When you go to pull, just it's mush. It's not stiff. There's nothing to pull against, and that tissue would kind of blow up or pull in a sense. Great example is right when you watch someone on the football field and they're running an open field, all of a sudden they blow their Achilles or ACL.
Terrible.
So what happened is they were doing a normal thing, but since they have suboptimal connective tissue, which is shitty connective tissue, so abnormal connective tissue is shitty quality. I want you to think they have plastic bags for connective tissue, for tendons. They did a normal thing and that connective tissue just blew up. The muscle said, I'm going to pull against this plastic bag, and boom, explosion. So we need to know how to build high quality connective tissue, which is something no one's thinking about training. They're thinking about what? Squat, hinge, deadlift, single leg RDL, kettlebell swing. They're thinking about leg day, and they're thinking about 5x5, 3 sets of 10, 4 sets of 8. They're not thinking, what am I trying to do with this? People are measuring success if their squat goes from 200 pounds to 400 pounds. They're not saying, are my tendons healthier? Do I have better quality connective tissue? Cool? So let's learn about connective tissue. We're going to nerd out, but that's how we do, baby. Let's go.
Dude, I'm ready to get starched.
Dude, I love this. I love it. It's so much fun.
I actually don't know if you realize like how much I enjoy our conversations, because I can appreciate the fact that I get to have a one-on-one conversation with you, and even with Trent and Aaron there, but like not many people get a chance to do that with somebody like you. So I'm totally,
dude, I love this. It's so exciting for me, because I wish, not because I'm some perfect person who's this wizard know-it-all. I just wish I could take a time machine and go back to when I first started running and said, hey, like, there's a lot of stuff that's going to save you a lot of pain and problems. And it's because, once again, we have different tissues in the body, and they require something. Something that's stimulating for bone will not be stimulating for the tendon. So if you have a bone problem and a tendon solution, not going to get better. You can get pain to go away, but that doesn't mean you're getting better. So connective tissue in the body is that stuff that surrounds muscle. Connective tissue, it sounds crazy. Most injuries are actually connective tissue based. So we want to really know how to build good quality connective tissue. So connective tissue needs 3 things, okay? It's going to be length, load, and time. That's how we can train connective tissue. Now let me break that down. Length is another word for strain. So when connective tissue is lengthened, now you could think of that as being in a stretch, or the tendons going under length. I'll explain that in a minute. When we put length into tissue, so ready? If I start eccentrically going, I'm putting length into the tissue. That is going to start to challenge the connective tissue. So when you hear the word strain, that sounds bad, like I'm going to strain my connective tissue. No, in the training world, strain is length. So more length equals more strain. That's important to know. So if we're not training at length, which means the muscle is at length in a deep stretch, or we're not heading to length, heading into a stretch, we're not challenging that much connective tissue. Is that cool?
Yep.
So if I simply do a lateral raise, I'm not really challenging that much connective tissue, because I'm just shortening a muscle. I'm not putting the connective tissue at length.
Okay, so what would be a movement for that then? Like,
for instance, like an RDL, where a Romanian deadlift, where you eccentrically stretch the hamstrings, is going to challenge the connective tissue far more than a deadlift. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, because people will start freaking out of what's connective tissue versus muscle. The truth is, you're training it all. Don't freak out. Like when you're doing a deadlift, you're training connective tissue, but I'm talking biasing, right? So we need length. More length equals more strain, and for tendons, strain equals gain. And I'm going to come back to that over and over and over again. If we don't strain a tendon, there's no change in length, and the tendon does not get stiffer. Now, when you hear the word stiffness, you're like, wait, so you want my knees to get tighter? I remember my old basketball coach said, if you have tight ankles, you're going to jump higher. No, we're not talking about the joint. We can talk about the joint later. I'm talking about like a basketball full of air will bounce and store and release energy. That's called stiffness in my world. Okay, the ability to store and release energy quickly is stiffness. Now imagine a basketball that has half the air. You bounce that, you have to do more muscular work to get it to the same height as the one filled with air. So that's important to know. People are going to think, well, my mobility sucks, so I've got lots of stiffness. It's like, not necessarily. Your mobility just sucks. So we need length. So if we are not putting the muscle under length, we're not going to strain the tissue and create stiffness. And stiffness is the ultimate goal. We want connective tissues to be stiffer. Now, that doesn't mean that your range of motion sucks, right? That just means you have better quality. So do we have a plastic trash bag or a tug of war rope?
We have we want a tug of war rope.
Exactly. We don't want shitty quality plastic bags. That's where people blow up. Most injuries I see are actually connective tissue injuries. People don't know that there's muscle and connective tissue. So someone will say, oh, I pulled my hamstring yesterday doing 400s. If their hamstring is not black and blue and swelling, it's not. If I don't see black and blue, it's not a connective tissue, or it's probably a connective tissue. Oh my gosh. I'm drunk. I'm going to go home. You can't get drunk off beet cheese, kids. You can just increase your nitrous oxide. So what I was trying to say, if I don't see black and blue, it's probably connective tissue. There we go. So when most people injure their hamstring and they're like, you know where you pull your hamstring or your calf, you're like, oh, I pulled my calf. So then here's the thing. Different tissues have different issues. So if you just go and do hamstring curls, that's to shortness, which is a muscular effort. So then you don't repair the connective tissue and then you re-injure that hamstring later. Are you seeing why it's important to know how to train the different tissues?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
And
cool. So here's a great example to explain why this is so important. Okay. So they just did a study on this year. And I know studies are kind of lame. Most people won't read them, but the research this is really interesting. So Lambrinitis, which sounds like Leonidas from 300, but Lambrinitis did a study where they trained the Achilles tendon. So they had people with Achilles issues. So they have poor quality connective tissue, plastic bags, and they wanted to increase the stiffness. So they had one group train just shortness. So I want you to think kind of like half range of motion, or where they raise their heel up really high. So you've probably seen that on the internet before, where people do calf raisins. They try to raise their heel really high.
Yep.
And they did that for 16 weeks. And when they were in the gym, they got about a 2% strain, and I'll explain what that means. The other group would go into dorsiflexion, which is a stretch. That's where you're stretching. They went about 20, 30 degrees, which is a lot. That's a deep stretch. And then they only went back up to neutral. They didn't go higher. Okay. They did this for 16 weeks, which is a long training. That's a lot of training.
That's a while.
Okay. The group that went into length, which is a stretch. Remember, when I say the word length, you can just replace it with stretch or strain, right? Which is what we're chasing for connective tissue. So when they went into the stretch, they got 5% strain. Now, let me explain why that's important. For a tendon to increase its stiffness, which is what we want tendons to do, we need a 4 to 7% strain when we do an exercise in the gym. When we run, we're going to get double-digit tendon strain, which is about 10 to 12, and sprinting is about 12 to 14. Why is that so important? Because we now know why people's tendons start to hurt when they do lots of speed work and why when they start sprinting and running. Because the tendon's getting stressed quite a bit. But we know that the tendon doesn't get built from running. Running is not that good for building bones and tendons. So it kind of is like one of those where if you're in middle school and high school, you need to spend a lot of time building your tendons and bones because it's a lot harder to when you're older, right? So we need about a 4 to 7% strain in the gym to achieve that. Now, people are going to be like, how do I know if I'm getting that strain? Don't worry about the numbers. Just think about if I'm at length, I'm getting strain. If I'm at shortness, I'm not. Okay. So the group that went into dorsiflexion in a deep stretch got a 5% strain versus 2. Now, here's the crazy thing. The group that got the 2% strain had no change in stiffness over 16 weeks. That is the one goal of tendon rehab, is to increase stiffness. No change. Do you think they probably got a good burn in their calf? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They probably thought they were doing some serious work.
I want to challenge everyone right now. Just find a wall, do like 30 single leg calf raises. You're going to get pumped out. You're going to get a burn. Most people make it to about 25 and fail. But no change in the thing that is going to make the tendon and more resilient and healthy. Now, the group that got the 5% strain, who went into the deep stretch in length, got a 9% increase in stiffness, which is astronomical. So now the 9% is like, that's awesome. What's crazier is the group that got nothing. So what is that telling you? That tendons need to be put at length, trained at length, or trained to length. And most people, when they do exercises, don't go into a deep stretch because their joints don't allow them to get there, or they're cheating, or they don't have good technique. Lots of various reasons. And what we also know about tendons is that there has to be, like I said, length, load, and time. So the second thing is load. We know that tendons need high amounts of load. Connective tissue is not muscle. So it can handle high amounts of load and high amounts of that. So what we found is with tendons that the load generally needs to be above 70% of max. That's super important to know. So if I'm able to do 10 reps, and all the time you'll see people do this on Instagram, they'll say, here's the top 5 exercises for patellar tendons or Achilles tendons. The big 4 tendons in the body that we would deal with running are the Achilles tendon, your patellar tendon right underneath your kneecap, the quad tendon above, not as much because that's for deep squatting. That's above the kneecap. We have our IT band on the outside. And the bottom of your foot, the plantar fascia, acts like a tendon, even though I digress. I've always wanted to say that on podcasts. It makes me sound really cool.
But I digress.
But I digress. If I use the word nuance too, I'm going to sound way cooler.
Yeah.
So high loads. So here's what I want you to think. If I can do 10 reps with an exercise with full range of motion, what does that tell me about the load? It's too
light.
It's too light. So if I go and I want my Achilles tendon, so if you're having an Achilles issue, that's a connective tissue issue, which needs a specific input. So if I go and I say, wow, I'm having Achilles tendon pain, and I just go and do single leg calf raises at body weight to failure, can I get pain to come down? Yes.
Maybe, yeah.
Almost everything works for pain. Right? For some people, it might be a little blood flow restriction. For some people, dry needle will work. You can do anything to get out of pain, right? I could drink a glass of whiskey and I could feel better, right?
Okay, that's valid.
I could watch Shogun on Hulu and feel better, right? Great show, by the way. I'm pumped. That was a fantastic. If you're not watching Shogun, where are you at? You're probably the same people that drink poppy.
I'm still stuck on Fallout right now. I haven't finished Fallout yet.
Oh, okay, for sure. Cool. Shogun's better. I stand by that fact. So what I'm getting at is, so on the internet, you'll see like, here's the top 5 exercises to cure patellar tendon pain or Achilles tendon pain. And you'll see someone with maybe like a 25, 50 pound weight, and they're doing calf raises, they're doing squats or split squats, and they do the weight for like 8 reps. And you're like, oh, that person could have done like 20 reps with that. It's not heavy enough. And here's the rule. If it is so light that you can go through a full range of motion, you're not going to put enough strain on the tendon. So most of the time when I'm prescribing tendon rehab, we're working only around 5 reps, and you only might be able to do 1, maybe 2 more. So that means when you get to rep 5, you're not getting full range of motion, because if you can do full range of motion, it's not heavy enough for the tendon. The muscle could be getting just absolutely clapped, like John, bam, boom, bam. So you could clap up the muscle because the muscles can respond to high volume and low intensity. So everyone knows if you just span a bunch of bodyweight push-ups, you can build muscle, right? So once again, people are like, how do I know if it's a muscle or tendon issue? Well, number one, tendons are pretty obvious, right? If you're jumping, if you can't handle single leg hops, if you feel like you're grabbing, you're like, that's the tendon, it's probably the tendon issue, right? Now, you'll know if it's not, because if it's another issue and you just spam some leg extensions, it goes away, that's awesome. But if it's a tendon issue, it's generally going to get better with a warm-up. If it's not a tendon issue, it will probably get worse as you exercise. So that's a good little measure there. So we need high loads. So if we can do full range of motion, and you'll see this all the time for Achilles exercises and leg exercises. So if I'm doing a full range of motion squat, that's not great for patellar tendon rehab because I can't go heavy enough. My back's going to stop me before I get the tendon to tap out. So we need length. We need high amounts of load. So most of the time I'm doing like 3 sets of 5 and probably 2 to 3 times a week. And then if we don't have high amounts of load and I'm in a stretch, I need lots of time. So for example, if I'm at extreme length, which would be like a stretch, like a middle split or something like that, I can improve connective tissue, but I have to be there for minimum of 2 minutes, preferable 5 to 10. So that's why if you've ever seen me post any videos of stretching, My clients are staying in stretches 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes because they need to build their connective tissue. So tendons don't need volume. They need specific things and intensity. So what are the big three for connective tissue now? Length. If we're not at length, we're not biasing connective tissue, and potentially we're not building it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's the issue, then over time, that's going to be a problem. So I call it the Aaron Rodgers effect. His Achilles tendon probably had suboptimal connective tissue, also because he didn't come to the Broncos, right? And then when his muscle, his cavum soleus, went to contract against that, plastic bag, and boom. Now, I'm not saying he could have prevented it, but no one's thinking about training connective tissue when it comes to their training. They're just saying, I'm here to do legs, and if I happen to do some like run specific strength sucks, I will. So connective tissue is what we need for stuff, what should we call reactive strength, which is how quickly we get off the ground. Your connective tissue is what you absorb force with and dissipate force with, which is your load bearing capacity. So what did I say in the beginning? Demands and capacity, right? So when people get hurt, they instantly decrease the demands because everything is painful. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we don't completely, we can talk about this probably in part 3, about how we modify gait and to help with a little bit of the demands on the biomechanics. But when it comes to increasing our capacity, one of the ways we increase our capacity is by the ability of the connective tissue to absorb more load, right? So when we run, the tendons do most of the work. So I don't know if you know, when we run, do you know that muscles actually are doing most of their work isometrically?
Is that why, like, some people consider if you're doing like a hit or a CrossFit workout, that the run up with a lot of people is more of the kind of rest period?
I don't know. Perhaps that. Well, that's actually a different story. That actually comes to
Okay.
venous return, kind of like we talked about the first one. If I'm flexing muscles above 30% of my max, especially in a CrossFit or Metcon, blood gets trapped in the working muscle. It can't return to the heart as easily, especially when you're doing stuff like burpees, squat thrusters, and then your heart rate increases. And then when you get back to the run, it's below 30% max, and you can cycle
Okay.
blood back to the heart. So it's going to feel like a recovery,
Okay.
and your oxygen utilization is generally going to go down. So not a bad question, but probably that's a little bit different example.
Okay.
So when we run, most of the energy is free. So if we're running on the flat, about 80% of the energy used to run is from tendons storing and recoiling, which is free energy, storing and releasing, almost like a pogo stick, right? It does not take much effort on a pogo stick to create that bounce. So when our tendons are healthy, we can store and release energy. About 17% of that energy comes from the foot. The Achilles will do about 35% of the work. The IT band is like between 5 and 14, closer to 14. And the lateral and posterior hip is another 20%. So what does that mean? The connective tissue in the tendons does about 80% of the work when you run. So is it important? Yeah. Especially when it comes to your capacity and ability to for your tissue tolerance. The better your capacity is of your connective tissue, the more you can make training errors and you don't get injured. How awesome is that?
Yeah, well, that's the idea. Not
By the
getting
way,
injured.
I wore a special shirt today, just for all the haters out there. I don't foam roll, baby. I don't. That's awesome. So what I'm saying is that if we improve our tissue tolerance, which one of the things is connective tissue, we can tolerate more errors because we're human. We're going to make errors. I'm telling you right now, every coach, every program is imperfect. And if you give it to 10 people, it's going to be even crazier because it was probably made for one person and then you spread it out to 10.
Well, not just that. Sometimes things happen. I mean, I was just running the other week, and I was running through a construction area, right? And I just happened to.
What were you doing in this construction area?
Yeah, not like that. Here's just a. Ooh, yeah. Eesh. Yeah, and I just stepped off of a uneven
Yeah.
ledge and just I ate it, rolled into the street and everything, and it's just.
Well, hopefully it's a tactical roll.
Yeah, it was a tactical roll, and I also don't have that far to fall and roll,
Yeah.
so it's like real quick ninja roll.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's super fun. So we also, besides training load errors, we have like real life errors where, like, say you're trail running. There's times where I'm going to leave neutral. That's why you're going to hear me all the time say the position where you need strength and the ability to absorb force in neutral is actually the least position, or sorry, neutral is the least. Oh my gosh, I'm butchering this so bad. It's because it's been a long work day. Neutral is theoretically the position where you need strength the least. Why? Because you're the strongest there. So That's where you're the strongest. That's why I'm always telling people to train in weird positions, train outside neutral, because guess what? You train perfectly with your knee in line with your second toe because that's what the internet says is right. And then you're on a trail, you roll your ankle, you're now out for 8 to 12 weeks because you thought that was wrong. And the gym said it wasn't right and didn't have a green check mark next to it. Your body doesn't know what right and wrong is. It has the demands that are placed on it, and it has its current capacities, which is the nervous system, the connective tissue, the muscular output, and the joint space that allows you to load and display that in variability. So what I'm saying is you have also errors just in terms of like you slip, you trip, your technique gets bad, all that type of stuff. And what's funny is people would probably argue that the thing that slows most people's training up is injuries. But yet we don't prepare for errors in the gym, which is crazy. So connective tissue, like I said, no one's training it. If I go into the gym and I said, okay, what have you done for the connective tissue of your hamstring? People are like, what does that even mean? Number one, are they training at length or to length? Now, once again, there's a little difference between isometrics and eccentrics. So so I want you to think. A lot of people are going to say, well, what about the muscles? What about the muscles? Well, it's kind of funny. So like we said, if we're in pain, we got to get out of it. And there's lots of ways to get out of pain. Now, one of the best is going to be your isometrics. So you're going to see isometrics all over the place. That's where we're not moving and producing force. They're very safe. Now, let's see if you've learned a little bit. So if I'm going to do an isometric and I want to focus on the connective tissue, would I put it, where would I do the isometric? At short or at length?
At length.
Fantastic. Look at that's huge. Most people would not think that. So a lot of times, if you want to get out of pain, you want to start with isometrics and you want to be doing them at length to start, right? At low intensity for maybe 30 to 45 seconds. And you need to hit failure, and that should help you decrease pain if it's a tendon issue. Now, but remember, that's not enough work to get strain on the tendon. So the problem is, we said that we need high amounts of load to strain the tendon. We have a problem. If you're weak, like if you're like kitten weak, by the way, I love this term. If you're like weak as a kitten, like kitty cat weak, you can't.
I thought you said Kipton, and I was like, I don't know who Kipton is.
Yeah, if you're like kitten weak, like as weak as a cat, not like a big cat because that's unfair. Like if you're a Bengal tiger, that doesn't count. So we said we need high amounts of load to strain a tendon. So if I have weak muscles, I can't produce much force and I can't really cause a tendon strain. That's why you're only going to see like patellar tendon issues and Achilles issues with people who are pretty strong or can jump really high and are pretty athletic. It's very rare to see a patellar tendinopathy in like a 70-year-old who's very weak, right? It's going to show up in new runners who are exposing themselves to high loads. So if we're weak, we can't strain the tendon. And why is that a problem? Because if we can't strain the tendon, we can't improve its stiffness. If we don't have a healthy tendon that's stiff, we can't do plyometrics or spam them. And we learned last time, if we can't spam plyos, we're probably going to have poor bone health or not be able to promote bone remodeling. So you have to go about training in the gym about what do you need to do to make your body better? Not what do I need to do to make my squat 50 pounds heavier? Now, if you have to get your squat or your deadlift from 200 to 400, yes, that's easy. But here's my argument. If your trap bar deadlift is at 200 pounds and you improve your muscular tissue, your connective tissue, your nervous system, and your joint space, how could you not lift more in the deadlift? What makes the deadlift? The nervous system, the joint space that's available at the joints involved, the muscular tissue, the slow twitch and the fast twitch, and the connective tissue that you pull against. So what is the deadlift itself? It's an amalgamation of those things in the body with our tissues. So you cannot tell me that if I improve my quality of my connective tissue, my nervous system's ability to pull against it using the muscle, I will not deadlift more. But if your deadlift goes up, doesn't necessarily mean your connective tissue and joint space is coming with it. In fact, I've trained too many people. This is not a brag. I've been around the block. I've seen over 30,000 people come through my doors. And I'll tell you, most people, as their weight goes up on barbell, their connective tissue gets worse, which means they feel tighter. They can't access length, which means they can't strain tendons, which is what we want. And then over time, their joint space decreases. So eventually that becomes a problem. So that's a lot of stuff. But so like, that's why it's so funny when people are like, oh my gosh, like I've got IT band issues and I think I can pivot now into knee injuries, right? So
Mhm.
like people will be like, oh, well, I've got an IT band, which is a tendon. So IT band's like the tendon of the lateral hip. We said it does about 14, 15% of the work, sometimes a little bit less. How many have you ever had IT band issues? I feel like every single person will or has.
You know,
Dig
I've
it.
had
Dig it.
I have had just minor. I've actually, I'm going to tell you right now, I've been extremely fortunate for ankle, knee, and shoulder. It doesn't mean that, especially at my age and the amount of abuse I put it through, for sure I have some arthritis in there. But in
Yep.
terms of, um, injuries and stuff like that, like I've been pretty fortunate.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Like that's no like it might be the vertical height. You're like you don't
Yeah.
have as much friction, like the air. Yeah,
I've got better oxygen down here than you
you're
guys have
stiff.
up here.
You're stiff, baby. Whoa,
Yeah.
stiff, baby.
Oh, I'm
You,
stiff.
yeah, yeah. See, now everyone's gonna listen to this podcast and say, "Well, my ankle doesn't move," and they're like, "Starch said that's
He
stiffness."
said it needs to be stiff.
Guarantee it's gonna happen. I'm gonna get messages being like, "Well, I thought Starch said that it's stiffness." It's like we're talking about connective tissue, not the joint. If your joint doesn't move, your hips are trashed.
So to
So
your point about why people are just so consumed with numbers, and it's same with looking on a scale, like hopping on a scale and you see the numbers. And it's like,
yeah.
man, sometimes you don't need to worry about that.
Well,
It's
here's the funny thing. We know if the stuff that makes up the lift is better, the lift has to be better. What else is the lift made out of? Everyone's outcome measure is the lift. So they just do everything they can. Doesn't matter how many sets, reps, how much they have to push to failure. They don't care. They will push to failure every set of every rep to force their body to produce that number. They're not thinking about using the deadlift to create a muscular adaptation. We're flipping the script. Most people say, I'm going to squat to get my squat better. If you're a power lifter, that's awesome. If you need to hit a squat to pass a test, yes. But I say, because the squat's not required of me, I'm using the squat today to work on my muscular tissue. Okay, I'm using the squat today to work on my nervous system. I'm using the squat today actually to reinforce the joint mobility work I did at my hip capsule. I'm not thinking, I don't even care what happens to the number. Now, I'm fortunate that I don't have a test number, and most people are going to freak out. If your connective tissue is better, your nervous system, your joint space, how could your lift go down? Prove to me, because it's what makes the lift.
Yeah.
But most people aren't thinking about that. So, like I said, this is adaptation-based, tissue-specific strength training. So, we got the IT band, like I said. So, let's bring this back to the knee, because I think this will make it easy. So, we got the knee, and we've got kind of three major issues people are going to see at the knee. The IT band pain, which is going to be really common in trail runners. Actually, it's really common in men. Probably 80% of IT band issues are going to come from the guys. It comes with a lot of speed work, a lot of downhill. So if you're a trail runner, you're going to see a lot of this. This is the number one injury in trail runners. Second thing is we're going to have patellar femoral pain. That's PFP, which is runner's knee. I know this is all a little confusing. And then we have the patellar tendon, which sits below the kneecap. And then we have the quad tendon, which sits above the kneecap. But I'm not going to really address that as much because we're only going to see that with people with who do deep Olympic lifts, like Olympic weightlifters or maybe some high level CrossFitters. So I'd like to stick to the three today. So we've got the three issues. I don't need to tell people what IT band pain feels like. It's on the outside of the knee, gets to the point where you can barely walk down hills. Now, back in the day, they thought IT band issues were because people had tight IT bands. I was told that, right? I was told your knee's collapsing in, you overpronate, so your glutes are weak, your IT band's tight. You need to foam roll your IT band because it's a friction issue. They used to think the IT band was like sliding over the lateral thigh muscles. That was what they thought originally. So the prescription was what? Stop running, start cross training. We know that decreases capacity.
Nope.
That's the wrong. Rest is the wrong answer. Remember, if you take a rat, because we can't do this to humans, and we immobilize their Achilles tendon, after 2 weeks, they will have a tendinopathy. They will have a tendinopathy. So if you rest a tendon for 2 weeks, you have literally induced a tendinopathy, even if it's a healthy tendon. Tendons love load, and rest is rust. Tendons need strain to gain. Remember that. So if you get a tendon issue, the last thing you want to do is unload. That's the last thing you want to do. Rest is the opposite answer. So once again, does ice increase the capacity of the tendon? No.
That's
so
a pain
you get where I'm going at. It's not wrong.
Yeah.
It can help you get out of pain, but it's not wrong. So we have the IT band pain, right? So a lot of people will be like, oh, you'll see people foam roll their IT band and they're screaming in pain. Well, this is kind of backwards because nowadays we know that the IT band pain, the IT band doesn't move. You can't stretch it. You literally cannot stretch it. It is like staked to your lateral femur, and it's not moving. You can't stretch it. And once again, a tight IT band, let's use the word tight. Remember, a stiff IT band is a good thing. In fact, when people rehab their IT bands, it gets stiffer. That doesn't mean range of motion. That means the behavior of the connective tissue. I know this is sciencey, but we have to put good science out there because there's so much trash on the internet. And people, once again, you can get pain to go away, but doesn't mean you fix the problem in the long run. And if it does go away, awesome. It might not have been that issue. So back in the day, people would rest. They would foam roll their IT band, and that's kind of the opposite of what you want to do. We think nowadays that the IT band is a compression issue. So it's compressing on, there's some fat pads on the outside of the knee with lots of nerves. So now, excuse me, I want you to think, if it's a compression issue, what is foam rolling? A compressive force.
Yep.
Sorry about that. I know this is tough stuff because it's new language to you, but it's like breathing to me. So foam rolling is a compressive tissue. It squishes. So we just learned that the IT band pain is probably a compressive issue with the tendon from training load errors, not from a weak glute, right? It's funny, actually in the research, they show that people have weak glutes because they get IT band pain, not the cause of it. So a lot of people will be told, you have knee pain because your glutes are weak. That's absolute bullshit. Now, after you have pain, your body will start to inhibit and restrict as the governor to protect, and you will start to see hip strength deficits, but it's not the cause and it's not a predictor. So people say, okay, foam roll your IT band. They'll say rest it. And now let's think about that. They've compressed it even more, and then they've rested a tendon. Rest is rust. And now they've deloaded it. And then after a few weeks of not running fast or not running downhill, it starts to feel better because they do anything. And then they feel like they're better. And then when they get back to speed work and downhill running, it blows up again. And then they're like, oh. And then the next person says, oh, you need to take aspirin. Oh, let's dry needle the TFL. Oh, you've got a tight TFL. And then they go back through. Notice how it's not wrong stuff. You got to calm stuff down because if we're in pain, we can't load.
Yeah.
If we can't load, we can't strain. But all roads lead back to load. I think I said that last time, but I didn't have this cool glowing mic. All roads lead back to load. Now, people are going to take this the wrong way and think, oh, if my knee is a 9 out of 10 pain, I'm just going to load it as heavy possible because that's what Taylor said. No, there's limits. When we're training a tendon, pain that's below a 6 out of 10 is acceptable to me. Some people are going to say 5 out of 10. So pain during the training session doesn't really matter because 24 hours later, the tendon's going to be at peak collagen degradation, which means that next day pain is a sign whether your tendon liked or hated it. It's like the opposite of, I'm going to get in trouble for this, like your significant other. You know how you're like, hey, like, you're like, I don't know if they like that. They're like, yeah, it's great. And you're like, they hate it. You know how it's kind of like opposite. I'm gonna get absolute.
You're gonna you torched.
I'm gonna get burned up for this one. So tendons tell you exactly how they feel, like not like it is in the dating world where no one tells, right? So the next day, if pain is worse, you did too much volume, not too much intensity. That's where people mess up. Remember, tendons love high load. They don't like high volume. That's why if your tendon's pissed and you go play basketball and the next day you go do 400s and the next day you do box jumps repetitive, no wonder why you're blowing up that tendon. It doesn't have any time to regenerate. And the next day after is when we see peak degradation. So if I do exercises to help my IT band and I load it at length, I load it heavy, not through full range of motion, right? And I do that for 5 reps. And the next day, my tendon pain is way worse. You did too much too soon. And you need to just decrease the volume, but keep the intensity. So that's important. So with the IT band, right? Foam rolling's not going to help. Hip strengthening, it comes back to what? Training load errors and all that. Now, the interesting thing is since it's a tendon, we know that tendons love plyometrics as well when the tendon's healthy. So this is actually where once the tendon is healthy, we can't just rely on strength training because that's one of the biggest things is the tendon has to store and absorb force. So a lot of people will just spam split squats or some glute strength their IT band pain will calm down, but they never bridge the gap with plyometrics. Okay. So we have the IT band pain on the outside. So and then we have the runner's knee in the front and the patellar tendon. So how do we know the difference between them? Because number one, location. So if it's on the outside, IT band pain. If it's kind of swirling around and changing positions and you don't know where it is and it's kind of here, that could be runner's knee or patellar femoral. If it's below the kneecap, it's probably patellar tendinopathy. Now, here's a test to see which one of the three you could potentially have. This is important. So you're going to take a slant board, which is that ankle stretcher, the one that can go up like 30, 40 degrees.
Yep.
Put about 15, 25 degrees, and you're going to place it up against a wall. Your back is going to be against the wall, and you're going to do the exercise that the knees over toes guy says is going to fix your knee pain. Now, pause, and I'm going to get, this is where, dude, they're going to shut down the grid. Big Rehab does not want to hear this, and I know a lot of people
it's a $1 billion industry.
Pain. It sounds like I have a vendetta against him, but here's the problem. For every 50 people that use the knees over toes philosophy to get better, I have 50 people who got worse and had to head towards like surgery and stuff like that. Just go to Reddit and type in ATG. So it's not wrong, but once again, there's people that look like experts that don't know anything about physiology, biology, and adaptation. So here's what I want you to know. The knees over toe step down that people do, where they spam that, like reach the heel out, is the test to see if you have patellar tendon pain. So it is called the provocative test, which means it's supposed to invoke pain. So if you have patellar tendon pain, it's the last exercise we want to get to. Now, caveat, we do want to get to the point where we can get there. And I'm not saying people haven't done knees over toe step downs and backward sled walks to cure their knee pain. But let's go over the rules. When I do a reverse sled walk or backwards treadmill, that's what everyone's doing, right? Reverse sled drag, backwards treadmill, and step downs. Am I putting the tendon and knee at length?
No.
Nope. Am I doing that at high loads? Nope.
It's volume.
So is pain going away? Yep, because the muscle likes it, and you're decreasing the demands, so your knee feels better, and then your capacity for the tendon gets worse, and then you have less reactive strength, and then in the long run, you might have fixed or might not. If it wasn't a tendon issue, you might have got lucky. If it was patellar femoral pain, once again, you might have got lucky. So I'm not saying all that those exercises are fine, but once again, it's not about exercises, sets, and reps. It's about adaptations. So the test I use to see if someone has patellar femoral pain, IT band pain, or patellar tendon pain is the exercise that they promote to fix it. It's the exercise I use to cause it.
That seems wrong.
It's a provocative test. Once again, if I decrease the demands and then I have you do high volume, like thousands of reps at low intensity, eventually pain's going to go away. But we're not talking about pain. We're talking about performance and the tissue behaviors, right? So if you start to bend your knee and do a step down and your back has to be against the wall and you get pain right away and it's like really sharp, aggressive, you probably have a patellar tendinopathy. So then you need to go to a tendon connective tissue-based solution. Cool? Mm-hmm. So now I want you to think, if someone does that and then they go and then they start doing low intensity, like quad banded exercises. Have you ever seen the exercise where someone just has a band on the backside of their knee and then they just strain their quad? It's called terminal knee extension.
No.
Yeah, it's a common rehab exercise. So people put a band behind their knee and then just flex their knee straight. So is that putting the kneecap at length? No. Is it high load? No. So we'll get pain to calm down? Yes. Do we want pain to go away? Yes. But it's not straining the tendon. So if it's a tendon issue, we need a tendon solution. Okay? So let's say you do that test and it's kind of like you get into like a quarter squat and it's kind of painful, like a 4 out of 10 pain. You're like, I'm not sure if this is runner's knee, IT band pain. Well, my other thing I do is I'll have people get away from the wall. We'll use a small box, like I'm talking like maybe half the height of the shin. And then we're going to do a step out, which looks like a step down, but you're going to reach one of your legs out as far as possible and do what looks like you're stepping off a steep rock hiking.
Okay.
If that causes a lot of pain, you probably have IT band issues. Once again, trying to figure out, because different tissues have different issues, right? Because if it's a patellar tendon, we're going to do things differently than an IT band pain. And then if it's one of the others, it could be the patellar femoral pain. So once we know it's a knee thing, we need to do two things, okay? Number one, we need a knee. We don't just need a knee solution. We need a connective tissue solution, right? We need to improve the tissue tolerance with tissue specific training. And then we need to modify the biomechanical loads, which is through gait modification. So what I mean through that is we know hills have the opposite effect on the Achilles and knees. So when I go uphill, it increases load on Achilles and decreases load on the knees. So what most people do is they make the mistake of going to rehab purgatory, right? They get a knee issue. They say, I'm going to bike and swim, and then they take 3 weeks off running. That's the worst thing you could do. You're dropping the demands, your capacity is plummeting. So what we want to do is try to preserve as much capacity globally as possible and run specific fitness. So an example was someone with me, I would have them run at about a 5% incline if they had an IT band issue. That will drop the loads on the knee about 30 to 35%. How awesome is that? So they can still run, but now we're distributing the load more to the Achilles so the knee can still experience running. Now, if it's really bad, we might have them do like 10% or an incline walk. Now, the key is we're just modifying gait so that the load is distributed to other places. Because I want you to think about it like this. It's like Red Rover. People are not going to understand that example. I realized I was like, I'm now a boomer if I just said Red Rover. They don't even allow that nowadays. It's too aggressive.
It's just amazing though that only 5%, because that's not a big incline, that only 5% can help distribute the weight that much to change your gait.
So
like that's
huge.
Minuscule.
That's huge. And once again, think about that in terms of pain. That can be a huge, if I said next week you work 30% less, that'd be nice. You would feel that. Right? So pain is not just our muscle. It's not a damage meter. It's our biology, our psychology. So our psychology is really important when it comes to pain. And so if there's a perception that there's less threat, your body will give you less pain. So we only need to modify our gait. And I'm not talking the way you run necessarily. So one of the things you could do is when you have IT band pain, you can increase your step count about 5 to 10%. And that will decrease the IT band, because most people are going to, with IT band, one of the things we see is people will cross their legs over each other. They'll be doing a lot of downhill. It's not wrong. It's just we want to change the way the muscles are getting loaded.
Okay.
So once again, I'm not saying this is the wrong way to run. This person's terrible. We're going to try to fix the way they run. We're going to temporarily modify how load is distributed through the body. So if I have them run at a 5% incline versus go to the bike, they're still maintaining their run, but they're offsetting that. Now, there's no perfect rule. I can't write a one-size-fits-all formula. It depends, but that's an example, right? So if I have a knee issue, we're going to have uphills, and they don't have to be very high, are going to decrease the loading on the knee. That way it can maintain that run-specific fitness. In the meantime, I need to be building up my capacity and tissue tolerance, right? And one of the other ways we can improve capacity is distributing load to more tissues. So the way to think of this is, right? So if I have, how should I explain this? If I have a joint and it can rotate 30 degrees, let's say it's my hip. I have access to 30 degrees of rotation in my hip. I can load, let's say, 30 million muscle fibers. Cool?
Okay.
Let's say we have a shitty hip. Really shitty hip. All your hips. Whoever's listening
trash.
to this,
You're trash.
Your hips are trash. If you guys know, when I worked with Shakira on her El Dorado tour, her hips are not trash. Have you not heard the story of me and Shakira on her El Dorado tour?
Are you being dead serious?
Like, you haven't heard this story? Okay, for another time.
No. You can't set that up.
No. We'll talk about this offline. That'll be like a members only.
So her hips don't lie then.
Oh, we'll talk members only for that one. So what I'm getting at is, let's say we've got a hip that can rotate 10 degrees. Then you have access to 10 million muscle fibers to train and load. So I want you to think distribute load, absorb force. So why is joint motion important when it comes to helping deal with the biomechanical loads? If we have two runners and all else being equal, runner A has 10 degrees of hip rotation, runner B has 30, who has more muscle fibers to train? The person with 30 degrees, because they have access to more tissue, right? I want you to think of degrees of joint motion is access to more muscle and connective tissue to train.
Okay. All right.
You can't move where you can't move, right? If your hip can only rotate 5 degrees, it can't rotate more.
So
you don't
so
have
all that
access.
other stuff is a waste.
Perfect. Yes. Yeah. I can tell this is like the 6th podcast we're doing because you're crushing this. So if I can't rotate my hip enough, then the muscle tissue that is supposed to get loaded can't. What happens to muscle tissue that isn't loaded over time?
It atrophies.
Atrophies. What happens to connective tissue? Does it get better or worse?
Worse.
Worse. So that means you start to feel tight. That means you no longer have less muscle to train. So you can't move where you can't move, and you can't load tissue that you can't access. So range of motion or joint motion is a passport to the tissues of your body you haven't loaded and explored. So if you have someone with an injury, the reason why joint mobility is so crucial is because most people's joint mobility is trash. So they have very limited tissue to train and to load, right? If someone has 10 million muscle fibers, eventually they're going to train those. And then once they're trained, it's like an orange without juice. So I want you to picture you and I are making orange juice. We've got 3 oranges in front of you. 2 of the oranges have almost all the juice squeezed out of them. To get any more juice, you have to squeeze and put a lot of effort. So much effort that you only get a couple drops. Why wouldn't you grab a new orange and give it a little squeeze and get a ton of juice? That's when you get access to more range of motion. Most people have trash range of motion and they don't improve it. So over 5, 10, 15 years, what happens to their muscle tissue? It's like the orange. They've squeezed out all the adaptations they can out of the tissue. So those muscle tissues are no longer adapting. They've been lifting the same deadlift the same way since 2008, right? So we call that, in my words, cellular senescence, which means the tissue has a finite ability to adapt. It's like Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt doesn't get any faster. He tries not to get slower, right? So when people are injured in pain, one of the other ways we improve our capacity is by having more access to joint space, range of motion, because then I could load more tissue. If I have more tissue to load, who's going to adapt more? The person who loads more or less muscular tissue?
More.
If I load more muscular tissue, I can produce more or less force.
More.
If I can produce more force, I can use that force to load at high intensities at length, which means I can use that to train connective tissue. And then if I have higher quality connective tissue, I can pull against that because it stress stiffens. I flex the muscle and I can produce what's called absolute strength, or be a mother freaking beast. I'm so pumped. I've got my glow in the dark mic and people are, I'm so hyped right now. So what I'm getting at is, once again, capacity is my connective tissue. Once again, it's not wrong to go in the gym and saying I'm doing a upper body push or pull. But are you trying to bias connective tissue? Are you trying to work on muscular? Because maybe we've got some high school kids and they don't have much muscular tissue. Then that's easy. Then you can do the low volume, high intensity game like Mike Metzer and Dorian Yates, where you do like 2 sets to failure and then you don't train that muscle for another 4 to 5 days. Or you go the Arnold and Lee Haney route and you do high volume and low intensity and train muscles multiple times a week. But I digress. Muscles are pretty easy. You get close to failure, you get a stretch, and you make sure that you're well fed. So to someone who's in high school, who might be a cross-country runner, muscular tissue is super important for their capacity. But a lot of guys have already gotten a lot of muscular tissue, right? Most people coming from football and stuff, they're pretty well off. Yeah. So where are people not training? The joint. So if the joint doesn't rotate, then I have access to less tissue when it comes to absorbing and dissipating force. And if the joint rotates 10 degrees or 30 degrees, who can access more length in a stretch?
30.
The person with more rotation. So now you see, if I can't rotate a joint, well, I can't achieve length of the connective tissue, and I'm going to feel tight. So if I have a joint issue, I need a joint solution. Different tissues, different issues. I wish it rhymed more beyond that. But the reason why, so if I've got a joint issue, now if I go back to the knee, let's say if someone's having pain because their knee doesn't rotate. One of the things the knee should do is rotate in and out. I know most people think of the knee as a hinge joint, flex and extend. It's actually a rotational joint when it internally and externally rotates. In fact, to bend the knee, you need it to internally rotate. So if you can't get into deep squat, you probably suck at knee internal rotation. If you can't fully lock out your knee, like after an ACL surgery, you can't get external rotation. Okay. So what I'm saying is with the joint is, oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. Joints.
Joints, the knees, internal,
Oh yeah,
external
yeah.
rotation.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The beet juices are almost running out. What I'm saying is, so if your knee doesn't rotate, is that a connective tissue issue or is it a joint issue?
Joint issue.
So you need a joint solution. Joint solutions are different than connective tissue issues because they're going to require a different demand and it's different than a muscular issue. So I can get a muscle stronger by hitting 30% barbell curls, 21s to failure. Everyone knows 21s, right? I could do 20 sets of bicep in a workout at low intensity and probably still build muscular volume if I'm relatively untrained, right? For a joint, we need to actually, to create space in the joint, we need two things. We need a rotational force. So we have to put a rotation. That's why you'll see stretches like the sleeper stretch or the 90-90. So we
Mhm.
need to go to the deepest stuff and we need to train it at max intensity. One more time. To increase the space in a joint and create a joint that rotates independently, which is a joint that moves. So joints that move can rotate independently. Joints that can't move can't. So to create a space or where those joints move, we have to rotate the joints in a stretch and train it at max intensity. Now, what do you see when it comes to mobility work on the internet? What intensity are people doing their mobility at and
It's
when are they doing it?
it's nice and slow, and it's either before or after a workout.
So it's in the warm up. So it's at a warm up intensity, which is below 30% of max, or it's in the cool down where it's below 30% of max. And it's done at low intensity. And it's done, like I said, most people aren't in rotational positions. They're in like linear stretches, like a hamstring stretch
Yep.
or like a chest stretch. So if I go to stretch my chest like this, that is not a joint solution. We need a rotational stretch to open the joint. Okay. So rotation before linear is how we get joints to open. So max effort means max effort. Now, that's different for different people. If I have someone who's never done joint mobility before and is untrained, for grandma, that might be like her effort might be pretty low and that's a max effort. For me, if I don't go absolute yabo, if I don't try to yeet my joints in half, I'm not getting a training stimulus. So now let's think about most joint mobility. Most people are doing little what? Banded rotations, so little banded warm-ups. Oh, here's my little bandy band. Is that a joint solution or is that a muscular solution?
That seems like a muscular solution just because of
I'm
the
going to
band.
trick question. It's a warm-up. It doesn't do anything. No, it could, right? So if they did it at enough volume at low intensity, they could get a muscular stimulus if they're what? Untrained. Everything works for untrained people. And if you're just trying to get out of pain, anything can work. What I'm saying is if I have a joint that does not move, I have to train the joint in a stretch at max intensity, which would be where you see my videos where I'm like, yeah, let's go, kill me, do it
Get
now,
it.
kill me, right? Because to get the joints to dissociate, which is create space at the capsular level, which is the deepest part of the joint, we have to use the nervous system to do what is like a max deadlift in a stretch, but it has to be a rotational stretch.
Okay,
So
so
now do you see why people have joint issues for years? Because they don't do the right solution for the problem that they probably correctly identified. They're like, my hip doesn't rotate. And then they foam roll it. That does not improve capsular space. They do it at a low intensity in their warm up. That's just warming up the tissue. Did you get where I'm going at?
yeah,
So that's
well,
a
it's
different tissue with a different issue, even though I know it's not a tissue, it's a space.
yeah, well, it's counterintuitive to what everything that we've always known because when you start thinking about taking a joint and going max intensity, it's like, whoa, I'm gonna damage the joint, you
Yeah,
know. So
yeah.
so what
But
would be so what would be could you
that's the level of intensity. Pardon me. That's the level of intensity you need to hit. Now, once again, if I'm untrained and if I've never done deadlift, I'm not going to say put 400 pounds on the bar and just go for broke. No, you would probably get a little comfortable, spend a few weeks, and then when you felt that person was safe and comfortable, then we send it. But the whole point is, I never see people get there. Imagine right now, you and I started a bench press cycle, and I said, Peaches, let's get you absolutely ganked. I don't know if do people say ganked, yoked. We're gonna get you. By the way, you're looking like Gaston. Dude, no one's thick as Gaston. Now I want you to picture that you and I grab an empty barbell, and then for the next 10 weeks, we just press an empty barbell. Could I get a burn in my muscles? Yes, if I did a bajillion reps.
yeah.
That is not your bench press is not going anywhere. So once again, just because I do a little warm up, little joint rotation thing, does not mean now. Now you're going to see people on the internet who have phenomenal mobility, who were like gymnasts and dancers growing up. And so they'll do like the world's greatest stretch in these little like joint, like, now I'm not saying that stuff is bad, because you should brush your teeth at low intensity, right? You need to brush your teeth every day to make sure that they're maintained and to get the gunk out. So low intensity joint work's important. I'm talking specifically if the joint does not move. If what you're seeing on the internet is people who are very mobile, who just do an active dynamic warm up where they do a couple world's greatest stretch and they're just good to go. That person probably has a background in like dance, martial arts. And so when they warm up, they have access to that range of motion. Most people whose joints don't move, it's not working that way. That's why you have to do all those thoracic opener drills. You have to do all those hip switches. It's because it's not adapting you. You're not changing. You're the same person you were last year. That's why every warm up you have to untighten everything, because your hip doesn't rotate. And if it doesn't rotate, you can't take the muscle and connective tissue to length, and then you cannot adapt that, right? And shitty quality connective tissue feels tight, right? So if you come to me and say, Taylor, my hamstrings feel really tight, you're basically saying in my language, my connective tissue quality is really bad, and so we would need to train it at length. But if I check and your hip doesn't rotate, can we get to length if the joint doesn't rotate? No. So we might have to do a joint exercise and then a connective tissue exercise. And then once the joint rotates and you have good length in your connective tissue, then I can go into the pump dragon, pump the magic dragon, and then send my hamstrings into that, whatever that gargantuan in Interstellar, right?
Yes.
Send them into oblivion with failure training, right? So most people, when they do joint work, do it as a warm. No wonder why it's not changing you. Take any other exercise you want to get better at, your trap bar deadlift, your pull-ups, and do a warm-up exercise and see if it improves your. Imagine for the next 12 weeks, you just do the world's greatest stretch when your squat numbers go up. No. So no wonder why your hip doesn't rotate anymore. No wonder why your connective tissue quality is bad. No wonder why your tendons don't have good stiffness in them. It's because it's not wrong. And I don't want people to get so neurotic now after listening to this podcast. They're like, I don't know what to do. Should I do a connective tissue? Is this? Calm down. Remember, if you're weak as a kitten and you're immobile and you're not fast and you can only do, I love when people are like, hey, so my pull-up max is like 6 and I got to 13 using this program. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you could have done anything and got to 13. It's right. Talk to me if you're at 25 pull-ups and you're stuck getting to 30, right? I also, back in the day, I'd be like, my sets don't start until 20. Sounds really arrogant, but what I'm getting at is that, of course, anything works when you're untrained. Talk to a person who's been deadlifting 500 pounds for 5 years. They're stuck. They might add 5 pounds, but then all of a sudden their back hurts and now they're down 30 pounds. And then they add 5 pounds. They're not gaining 50, 60 pounds. A lot of people were like, oh, my trap bar deadlift went from 180 to 300. I'm like, yeah, you're untrained. So you don't need to freak out about this stuff, but if you have specific issues, you need a specific solution. So now we see, like most people's solution. Okay, we've got an Achilles tendon issue. Ready? Or shin splints, which is a bone issue. So let's use shin splints. If it's a bone issue, we know we need the opposite of tendon, which we need bone to be loaded quickly. We need a high strain rate, and we know we need to do it quick and fast, which is the opposite of what slow and heavy that we need for the tendon. You go online because you have shin splints, and it says to what? Rest them.
Ice them.
It says to ice them. It says to take NSAIDs. Now let's see how this adds up. The NSAIDs are going to kill inflammation so you feel less pain, so you think you're doing well. NSAIDs or ibuprofen stuff is going to blunt bone remodeling, so it's going to stop bone growth. Okay, that's a wrong solution. Rest is not a stimulus for bone. Neither is foam rolling. And then you stretch your calves, and then you do the tib raises. That's not wrong. The biggest thing you'll see, people, is tib raises. That's a muscular input. To give you a clue, when we run, the tibialis only deals with about 0.8 times body weight when we run. That's not much. The soleus deals with 6 to 8 times body weight. So isn't it funny? People are like, oh, you've got shin splints, which is a bone issue. Do this muscular input to failure, which would be great if you had a muscular issue. So if you have tibialis or shin issues and it's because of finning, then shin raises would work well, right? If it's a muscular issue, it's going to go away with a muscular solution. So a lot of people will actually, they don't have real shin splints. They just have sore shins or sore tibialis. They'll do toe raises and they'll be like, oh, that's how you fix shin splints. I'm like, no, it's not. It's how you fix weak shins. So if I have a bone issue, I need a bone solution, right? If I have a muscular issue, and that's what I'm getting at. So like, for instance, if I just spam tib raises, I do backward sled walks, I start cycling and swimming, and then I take NSAIDs, and then I ice my shins every night and foam roll them. Do my shins feel better? Yes.
Gross.
What's happened to capacity?
Gone down.
Plummeted. But you remember, training load errors don't show up for another 4 to 10 weeks. So then you come back and you start running in, you feel good because that's how the body works. And then all of a sudden, 6 to 8 weeks later, the pain's worse, or now your right knee hurts. That's the issue, right? So like with the muscles, like when it comes to running, the big three. So I think, is it okay if I delve into muscle?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, cool. This is awesome. Guys, this is so fun for me. I love getting to talk to Peaches. So let's talk. People are going to be like, well, Taylor, you talked about joint. You talked about kind of bone, connective tissue. The final two would almost be the nervous system, which is pretty easy in a way, in my opinion, because you need to train things heavy and fast. But the muscles are important too. So when it comes to running, like I said, the soleus is theoretically the number one most important muscle. They're all important, but it deals with the most force because the soleus is the primary muscle for vertical support and propulsion, which is forward movement. The second is going to be the quads. The quads deal with eccentric braking or slowing us from sinking. So every time we hit the earth, gravity tries to push us down. The quads stop that sinking. And then the outside glute. That's why people are obsessed with the glute. So the glute deals with around 2.5 to 3.5 times body weight. The quad deals with about 4 to 6 times body weight. So think about that. What do most people train when it comes to being injured running? Their shins, right? That's only 0.8 times your body weight. If you do a pogo hop or like a single leg hop is going to actually be like 3 times body weight, and a shin raise is going to be less than a body weight of shin.
That's crazy to think about, just single leg hopping.
You're basically just modifying symptoms until pain goes away. You're not really getting stronger, faster, better. So the big three muscles are the soleus, the quad, and the outer glute, right? Notice how I didn't say the glute max, the hamstrings. That doesn't mean they're not important, but those are the big three when it comes to that. So of course, if I'm weak and I have never really built serious muscle in those 3 areas, that would be important, right? So I just want you to think about those are the top 3. And when it comes to muscles, we can kind of head 2 directions, right? We can train more the slow twitch fibers or the fast twitch. Now, fast twitch, we'd probably have to fail the effort before 30 seconds. Slow twitch, we'd have to go long into failure. But if we're doing endurance training, we don't need to do too much slow twitch work, right? Because I'm already getting that in my swimming, rucking, running, grass, and gorillas. So a lot of people are like, well, Taylor, the pipeline and selection are a lot of strength endurance, so I should do strength endurance work, right? Let's think about what we can do with the muscle. We can get more of it. We can build more muscle. That's called hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can get it to produce more force, which is strength. Or I can make it aerobically fitter, which is kind of our capacity to utilize oxygen. There is no such thing as strength endurance training. I can either get more of the muscle, so that's bigger in terms of cross-sectional area. That's called hypertrophy. I can get it to produce more force, that's strength. And then I can get it to deliver or utilize more oxygen. So if you want to improve your strength endurance, it's very simple. Either A, get the muscle stronger, which everyone knows how to do, or B, build more of it. If you have more of the muscle and it's stronger, you're going to have more endurance. Think of it like this. If I can deadlift 200 pounds, how many reps can I do at like 175? Couple?
Oh, yeah.
So now I want you to picture if I can now deadlift 700 pounds, how many reps can I do at 175?
A lot.
But did I work on endurance training?
No, but it's I don't
because
know.
I'm limited by my absolute strength. So absolute strength training is still important for endurance training and capacity. So everyone is always like, when is he going to talk about like strength training? I'm like, I am. So if you get a muscle stronger, I have more endurance. So ready? Here's a pro tip. This has nothing to do with running. You want to know one of the best ways I help people increase their pull-up numbers? Let's do another podcast. I'm just kidding. People are going to be like, no. Ready? you increase the absolute strength of your reverse barbell curl. Get that sucker to like 135. No one's doing it. But if you can,
a reverse curl, like overhand?
Because the brachialis, I know this is off topic. The brachialis is the muscle that we pull, right? When I do pull-ups, and most people are just doing bar hangs and they're doing high rep pull-ups, but that is not absolute strength, which is how much weight you can lift with that particular muscle group. So now
Dude, I can't even imagine doing that.
Here's my example. Most people would reverse curl like 65 pounds and they would hit failure at 1 set of 10. Now I want you to picture if I can reverse curl, barbell curl 135, how many reps can I do with an empty bar?
With an empty bar, unlimited.
Have I trained endurance? Yes or yes?
Nope.
Yes. Because I've increased my absolute strength. So remember, for strength endurance, if I increase my strength, I increase the endurance too. Now, I have to be doing actual high rep pull-ups as well, or else there's no aerobic capacity,
okay.
Right? Even rowing, right? Rowing it would be a great aerobic stimulus for those forearms. I'm sorry this is off topic, but it's not.
No, it's not off topic at all.
Name a single person that's trying to increase everyone's trying to get their trap bar deadlift heavier. Who's saying, I need to increase the absolute strength or the capacity of my muscular tissue of my brachioradialis? No one. No one. If they're doing a bar hang to failure, is that low intensity or high intensity? It's low intensity, high volume. So now you understand I can train for the fast twitch fibers for absolute strength or the slow twitch fibers for more the aerobic capacity. So if I go and I increase my absolute strength, my strength endurance has now increased as a byproduct. How awesome is that? That's why getting stronger is awesome. I'm not against strength. I'm a strength coach. I love it. So, but what people are doing is they're only doing the endurance side. So when it comes to muscles, volume does work. So does intensity. They've shown that anywhere between 1 set and 52 per week works. But we need to make sure that we, like I said, for when I coach people, we're either going to focus on slow twitch aerobic capacity so that would mean like, hey, we're going to do a set at like minimal weight for 5 minutes straight. Now, we're not going to lock out and we're not going to go into like a stretch because then I would be trying to get connective tissue. So a 5-minute set for slow twitch fibers. And then the next week I might say, hey, this is fast twitch week. We're going to fail before 30 seconds because I want your fast twitch fibers to be better. So the strength or endurance side, but you don't have to train strength endurance. You either train the slow twitch or you get slow twitch or fast twitch. And once again, you're training both, but it's biasing. I'm not saying when you do an exercise, you don't use both slow and fast twitch.
Right.
That's called the Henneman size principle. What I'm getting at is I'll have people for their low back. If people have poor muscular tissue in low back, that is what? Poor capacity. So a lot of people deadlift. Deadlift is what? An isometric. So do you think that's more for muscle or more for connective tissue?
Muscle.
Connective tissue.
Ow, jeez.
You're wrong. I'm just kidding. No, literally. Remember, you're training all of it. You are training the muscle. You are training the connective tissue. You are using the joint. I'm talking about so when you do a deadlift, it's more a connective tissue stimulus for the low back. No wonder why people don't get hypertrophied in their low back, and then they tend to blow out their low back, right? So I will have people do like reverse hypers some weeks at a low weight for like 3 to 5 minutes in a set. 1 set or 2 sets.
That's gnarly.
Then the next week, they'll use a weight where they have to fail before 30 seconds, so they're fast twitch. So it's kind of a fun little system, but we can buy a slower fast twitch. I focus on both. I want both. And then we need to be close to failure or at failure to really build new tissue. So training muscle is simple in a way because there's so many sets and rep schemes that work. You'll have some dude be like, oh, you've got to do 3 sets versus 4. I'm like, it's all a wash. You got to get the muscle close to failure. It's going to grow more in a stretch. Here's the fun thing. Muscles grow more or hypertrophy more when you take them into a deep stretch. Isn't that funny? What did we talk about? So if I've got better quality connective tissue, I can load more muscular tissue. Why are gymnasts so yoked? They have great quality connective tissue. And so when they do pull-ups and muscle-ups, they pack on muscle like crazy because they have so much connective tissue. Have you ever seen like at the gym, the kettlebell racks?
Yeah.
That is like what connective tissue is. And the kettlebells on the racks is muscular fibers. So if I want to hold more kettlebells and I have a rack that's full, I need more kettlebell racks or dumbbell racks. Dumbbell racks and kettlebell racks are like the scaffolding or the architecture of the connective tissue. So more connective tissue, better quality connective tissue means more dumbbells on the racks, which means I can produce more muscle hypertrophy.
More weight.
So that's why people with good range of motion, if you look at all the old school bodybuilders, Ronnie Coleman could almost do the splits. Dorian Yates, Tom Platz, the guys who they had phenomenal range of motion because better quality connective tissue. Remember, length is quality connective tissue. If I have tight connective tissue, I can't access length. So good quality connective tissue allows me to build more muscle. More muscle allows me to strain the connective tissue and train my joints, because if I don't have muscle, I can't produce enough force to train my joints. You see how everything makes everything better?
Yep.
But the goal is you. The goal of a training session should be you, not a particular exercise. Yes, if you need to hit 20 pull-ups to pass a test, you need to do that. But it should be the stuff that makes up you. My concern is, are my shoulders better shoulders? Do I have more access to length? Is that muscle getting trained both slow and fast twitch? And then my nervous system, right, is going to get stimulated with stuff that's fast, heavy, and complex. So that'd be your plyometrics, your Olympic lifts, and all that stuff. And I think most people are already doing that stuff pretty well. If I took my 4 things that make up the capacity, nervous system, so that's fast and heavy. A lot of people train heavy. Joint space, connective tissue, and muscular tissue. Which are the 2 that people focus on the least of those 4?
Probably Ooh.
What would you, when you go to the gym, what do you see people doing? Powerlifting,
Yeah.
bodybuilding, and then some form of like HIIT, which is fine. All that stuff is great. I don't see people spending 4 minutes in a stretch and then isometrically contracting to make that connective tissue stiffer. I don't see people trying to get their joint mobility better. They just warm up. Remember, warming up and cooling down does not change anything. If it did, why would you train? It's funny. People will be like, oh, I'm doing the world's greatest stretch because it's so good for mobility. I'm like, why'd you have to do it all the time if it's so good?
Because
you have to do it all the time because it's not changing you. If water has to reach 100 degrees to boil. Do we accept that?
Mm-hmm.
So if it gets to 80 degrees Celsius, it doesn't boil, but it gets hot and you waste propane.
Correct.
So that means when you're in the gym, you can waste propane and get your water hot, but it doesn't boil. So you don't get the adaptation. Remember that example from earlier? The people trained their Achilles tendons for 16 weeks. No change in the tendon's architecture. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't get other benefits, and maybe they got out of pain, and maybe by getting out of pain, they were able to run more, and then it eventually worked out. I don't want people to be afraid of getting wrong results. I don't want people to become neurotic to the point where they're like, I don't know whether I should be doing joint work or connective tissue. I'm not deadlifting anymore because Taylor hates deadlifts. No, train. Most of the people listening to this are so untrained you can do anything. I'm trying to get you to think about what the goal of training is to adapt specific tissues and then using those tissues, that joint, that muscle, and that brain to unleash hell in whatever lifts and whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do. But what makes up a squat? What makes up a pull-up? Muscles, connective tissue, joint, and your nervous system, pulling and using that available space, muscular tissue to discharge force, and however it is. So now you can start to assess, like for instance, like I said, if someone's having a bone issue, we need a bone solution. If someone's foot isn't moving, so when we run, we need to be able to absorb a lot of force at the foot and it should move. So if someone's foot doesn't pronate and supinate, that's a joint issue and the joint's not moving. We need to get the bones to move, right? So let's say, once again, I'll bring it back. I think the more examples just makes my point a little bit easier and people will be able to understand more. Let's say we go and you're having issues at your calf. So you stretch your calf and you do calf raises, but your foot doesn't move, which means pronate. Your foot has 26 bones and 33 joints. And when your foot hits the ground, it's supposed to move. You're supposed to stretch the foot and all 3 arches are going to lower and absorb force. Like a trampoline. When you step on a trampoline, all the bones spread out and absorb force. So if you can't pronate, you can't load that tissue, absorb force, and use the tendon to get free energy. So now your calf has to do more work and it gets tight. So you foam roll your calf, but your foot doesn't pronate And you spend years wondering why your calves are tight because you were focused on trying to rub a muscle versus get bones to move. So here's a great example. I train lots of people and they're like, my calves are tight. My calves are tight. I foam roll my calves. Have you ever checked to see if your foot pronates, which is one of the two things it should do every footstep? People are like, I don't even know what that is. Perfect. There we go. So now we're making the joint better. So is that person getting more awesome? Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's check and see if they're doing stretches at high intensity for their Achilles tendon. Oh,
Nope.
they're not. Nope. Nope. And if they are, like I said, maybe they're doing like a calf raise with a 25-pound kettlebell. That's less as a stimulus than walking, right? So I think what is it? If you do like a single leg calf raise at body weight or like 25%, I think it's 25% or a quarter of the stimulus that like a slow jog would be. So you might as well just go for a jog.
Yeah, then
right?
you get some cardio out of it.
Right. Because running is about 2.5 to 3 times body weight. So we need to stimulate. We're not trying to prevent injuries. We're trying to perform better. And remember, the higher our tissue capacity, the more training load errors we can handle, which we're going to have all the time because we're human. People are going to be like, what do I do? How do I make sure I don't do training load errors? Don't be stupid. The best exercise when it comes to preventing training load errors is exercising restraint and patience and realizing that it's not about testing your fitness, it's about expanding it, right? So exercise restraint is the best way to preventing training load errors. Bam, bam.
I was wondering when expanding your fitness is going to come out.
So the cool thing is people are like, well, when my foot runs, my knee comes in a little bit and I'm trying to fix that. Stop. You need to improve your tissue's capacity to handle those loads because maybe that's the way you were born to run, right? So a lot of people are trying to run differently. Now, once again, if we have an injury, we might temporarily modify the way we run. An example. So if we have an Achilles issue, that is an Achilles issue. So we might put someone, now a lot of people run in zero drop shoes because that's how the caveman did it. They all ran in ultras and topos. But if I've got someone with Achilles tendon, a tendon issue, I might have them wear a 10 millimeter high drop shoe so that it's less load on the Achilles. And then we might have them run downhill. Because what did I say earlier? So if they run uphill, it's more force on the Achilles and less force on the knee. So I might have someone with Achilles issue do most of their runs at a 5% downhill. So once again, are we having them necessarily stop running? No, we're modifying the way the load is distributed. I'm making the joint rotate better, improving the connective tissue's load-bearing capacity. I'm improving the muscular's ability to either A, produce force, or B, more of it. And then I'm letting the nervous system practice unleashing hell. So once we get capacity higher and we start to get back to where we need to, we stop modifying the gait. We don't keep trying to correct stuff. I'm not going to have people run forever like that. But the whole point is we have this like balancing act, right, between that. So we modify the gait because of our training load errors. So we have a little bit, right, because we got to keep capacity. That's the biggest thing we have to do is figure out how to not lose capacity. Because that's what we see. When people have knee pain, why are their glutes weaker? Not because their glutes made their knee hurt. It's because since their knee hurts, their body says, yo, if you keep running hard, I'm going to get injured. So I'm going to decrease drive to your glutes. And now we see that difference, right? So the body's always going into protection mode. And so that's why this pain is crazy. And now when you think about it, when you walk in the gym, instead of thinking it's leg day, which is not wrong, you can think it's leg day and you can say, today I want to train my hamstring and the glutes. Now I want you to say, what am I doing for the joint? So what am I doing for my knee? If you're not training something, you're not acquiring anything. So you get whatever you ask your body to do in training. So ready? If I'm not training to improve my joints' ability to rotate in space, over time, I will get worse at that. Here's a pointing example. Stop stretching and doing joint mobility work and come back to me in 15 years and tell me if it's better or worse. Same thing. Stop brushing your teeth. We all know the consequences.
Right.
Whatever you're not training for, you're not acquiring. And most people are not trying to acquire better quality connective tissue. Once again, we need to put a tissue at length and then we need to contract it either isometrically, eccentrically at high intensity, right? Or we talked about last time using sign of the slow isotonic, which is slow tempos, right? So if I talk to most people in the gym, we said that, like, how do most people hold a stretch for 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds at low intensity?
At most.
we need 2 to 5 minutes. No wonder why nothing's changing, right? So you're walking in the gym now with this different perspective. So you can say, today I'm doing deadlifts and squats. What are you doing for your joint? What are you doing for your connective tissue? What are you doing for your slow twitch fibers, fast twitch? Don't get overwhelmed, but I call it my little adaptation wheel. And when people are having issues, let's say they have knee pain, I'll go and I'll write knee and I'll draw up joint, connective tissue, that. And I'll say, okay, what over the last 8 weeks have you done to improve your joint? And someone will be like, I don't know what you mean. Perfect. We can work on making your joint better. Awesome. Cool. Then I would say, what are you doing for connective tissue? They're like, oh, stretching is the worst. It doesn't do anything. Actually, no. Stretching is just strength training in an end range of motion where you have the connective tissue at length. So if you say stretching doesn't work, you also say strength training doesn't work, right? So, touche. If then I show them and I start coloring it in, and then I'm like, do you understand why maybe your knee is not able to handle your demands right now? Because 50% of the things that make up your knee aren't being trained and haven't been trained in a long time. So what I do is I don't freak them out, and I say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to modify your gait so that you can distribute force to other areas so your knee gets a little bit of a break. Correct. Then we're going to increase your capacity at the same time. And then once we get your capacity up, then we're going to just stop this gait modification stuff and go back to building up your speed work, your uphill, whatever, right? If it's IT band, we'll have to get back to downhill. If it's shin stuff, we have to get back to uphill. And that like when it comes to stuff, that's the first question I'm asking. What type of issue is it? Does the joint move? Does the connective tissue have good length and good stiffness? I know it can get confusing, right? Can I discharge a lot of force, right? So if I'm weak, can I strain connective tissue or really get joints to move out? Can I lift heavy weights? No.
Nope.
So if you're weak, you need to get strong. If you're in pain, you got to get pain to go away because you can't load. But remember, we learned there's rules about pain. If it's a bone issue, pain's not acceptable in training. So if I've got a bone stress injury and it's a grade 3 or 4 stress fracture, if you feel pain 3 out of 10, no, spaghettios. If it's a tendon, we're okay with that. So there's rules and levels to this. And now people might be able to kind of peel apart if they have had an unsuccessful rehab or if an area keeps getting injured, they're going to be like, uh-oh. Now I start to see, I just was doing exercises and pain goes away. Once again, just because the symptom goes away doesn't mean you're a more resilient person. And over time, it's going to come back to haunt you. Your outcome measure, which is how you measure success, needs to be yourself in the tissue-specific behaviors, which I call capacity, which is all about expanding your limits.
There you go. I feel like you just summed all that up right there.
I feel the more you hear it, the more you can't unhear it. And I'm not saying what people are doing isn't working. It clearly works. People know how to get their bench press heavier.
Yeah.
Just smash your shoulder into oblivion. Force your nervous system like an armed robbery to give you more strength temporarily. But here's the crazy thing. I can improve a patternized I can improve a lift by improving myself. But sometimes if all your concern is the lift and sets and reps, your internal environment might actually be degrading. It might be accommodating. And over time, once again, here's a great example. You're benching 180 and then all of a sudden you're benching 270. It's the heaviest you've ever benched, but your shoulder's the worst it's ever felt. It's tight. It's painful. You have to take NSAIDs. You have to get 17 dry needles with E-stim just to even get through your incline bench session. And then you take that muscle to failure and you're not even trying to see, does the joint rotate? Do I have good quality connective tissue? You're pulling against plastic bags and then all of a sudden you blow a pec and you're like, oh, I just blew my pec today because I didn't have good technique. No, you had shitty quality tissues that you never specifically trained, and over time, you got your bench press to 400 pounds, but your connective tissue could only handle 200. Blown out. Don't be afraid of training. The body is resilient, and the reason why people can get away with so much stuff is the body will compensate until it can't, and then we have pain, which normally comes months and weeks after we've had issues. Then we have problems. Then we have plateaus. Then we have plateaus that we try to solve with more problems. And then we just throw more failure and volume at it until it doesn't work. And then eventually we get injured and we're like, oh, it's because I didn't warm up today and I didn't hit my little foam roll my lacrosse ball in my pec minor. No. I must have not pulled my shoulder blades back and down. No, your tissue capacity sucks and your training program is garbage. And you don't even know Shakira.
Dude, you can't just drop Shakira on me and
Yeah, I can. Dude, she got hip rotation.
well, yeah.
It's supposed to make training exciting because now all of a sudden you have really good guidelines to say, well, remember, you're training everything, you're biasing. You can catch so many issues. So before all of a sudden you are bench pressing and your shoulder goes like, oh, shoot, oh, ooh, ooh, ooh. If you're training your joint, if you're working on training your connective tissue at length, if you're working on fast twitch, slow twitch, you will start to find, let's call them issues or roadblocks or parking brakes that I used to say, the parking brakes, well before you have any issues, and especially as the weight goes up. People that train this way, generally as the weight goes up, feel better, better, better. People that don't focus on joint connective tissue and all this other stuff feel worse and worse and worse. It's because, once again, what makes the lift? A deadlift is a thing that we created with things. And the things are the trainable bits. If I ask, what can you train in the human body? We know we can train in biased connective tissue. We know we can build more muscular tissue and hypertrophy. I know I can train my nervous system to improve its rate of force development or maximal force output. I know I can get the joint to move. Those are trainable things. But most people just say, oh, today I'm just doing squats. That's not wrong. Why are you doing a squat? For what tissue? For what purpose? Right? So if I'm doing a hamstring exercise, it might be for connective tissue, and then the next day it's for muscular tissue. I'm trying to upgrade my whole body.
Well, yeah, you're not trying to just trying to get starched and do something better than just one thing.
This doesn't mean we don't train hard. This doesn't mean we're just sitting around doing all this weird stuff. It's normal training. I can take a bench press and bias connective tissue in a bench press. I would have to what? Go to length under high loads or at length for long periods of time. So maybe I do a 5-minute eccentric on a bench press. Connective tissue bias. Now, that wouldn't be good for muscular tissue because I'm not moving into concentric action right afterwards.
Right, but you're being intentional for that session.
But once again, when people pop their pec in a bench press, if I don't see black and blue connective tissue, most people are injuring their connective tissue and they're not training it. I hope people, when they listen to this, they look through their training and they're like, okay, I did bicep curls to failure. I did some push-ups. I did some pull-ups. And then I'm like, okay, when were you in a stretch for 3 minutes and then contracting at like 80% of your max as hard as possible? They're like, oh, I don't do that. Okay. So when are you doing like a slow tempo 3-second, and I'm like, are you going through a 4, right? The training isn't there. Now, their muscles might be getting better and their brain might be able to discharge more force, but eventually the weakest link will eventually show up. You're only as strong as your weakest link. You're only as strong as your shitty connective tissue, your poor joint space. You're right. For some people, it is muscular tissue. A great example is you take a bunch of yogis, right? They have great range of motion. They have joints that generally move well. They have poor quality muscular tissue. So actually, that would be a great input for them, right? Kids don't have the ability to really discharge that much absolute strength, but they have full range of motion in their joints, right?
Oh,
a 5-year-old kid has great range of motion, but they have no ability to take that and display it in a lift. So you will be astounded when you start improving the quality of your connective tissue, your joints' ability to rotate and move, how your lifts just skyrocket. You're not even trying. You don't even need to go. Why'd you need to go to failure in your lift? Why'd you need to go to failure? The lift is not the thing. The thing is the things that make up the lift. Can you go to failure in a lift? Sure. But if I go to my max limit in a squat, the weakest link will eventually get taxed. And if I keep doing that with poor training programs, it will go. That's why so many people are like, oh, I had perfect form. I don't understand why I blew my back out. Because you're not training that stuff, right? And if I go to my limits, I will find them. And who's ever the weakest of those 4 will get injured. And it's most of the time the connective tissue or the joint. Now, I know muscles do get hurt. They do get injured. I'm not saying that, right? and then the nervous system gets fried to the point where you just plateau and you can't break that 300-pound squat. Your body won't give it to you because it feels threatened.
Yeah, it's man. There's a lot to understand.
People are
there.
trying to push the external exercise up almost like a volume. They're not focused on the stuff. You need to push your limits internally, and then when you get to the lift, here's what I want you to think. Let's say I'm squatting, and over the last 4 weeks, I've improved my ability to rotate my hip like 10 degrees, and I've improved the quality of the connective tissue so my muscles can pull harder and produce more force. When I go to my squat, let's say I don't increase the weight. When I show up to that squat, I'm a new version of Taylor. I have a new hip. I have new connective tissue. So when I train at that same weight that I was using 4 weeks ago, it doesn't represent the same amount of weight. I'm training new tissue. Yes. So do I need to go up crazy in my weight? No. Beginner gains. It's like I grabbed a new orange, I barely squeeze it, and I get a ton of adaptation, a ton of juice. It's all about the juice, baby.
That's right.
Most people are taking shriveled up oranges and trying to squeeze it with all their might to get 5 pounds on their bench press, and they might get 5 pounds, but they're using so much effort to get 5 pounds when if they just had access to better range of motion connective tissue, they had better quality everything, they would take that new stuff, use the same weights they've been lifting or relatively not that crazy weights, sub-maximal, you'd squeeze it and you'd get gains like crazy. Because you have new tissue to adapt. Eventually, you can no longer adapt tissue.
Well, that's actually the
bit or build new.
And that's actually the thing. Like, so you've given a lot of stuff out of here. The biggest thing that's kind of and it's common sense, really. It's you've got to get past a certain point, like that almost like a governor on a car with a speedometer, right? So it's keeping me from going past certain speed. But as soon as I can get past it, all that is new muscle that I get a chance to train and get better.
I'm so hyped. Yes. Yes. It's new. It's like you grab a new orange. You're trying to make orange juice. Now, when you barely squeeze. So once again, let's say you've been squatting at 225. You improve your connective tissue, which means access to more length. You can rotate the joint more, access to more tissue. Now when I squat, I'm training fibers I've never trained before, and they're getting exposed to a weight that... Now, the fibers that I have been training are like, I don't care, you've been doing this weight for weeks. I'm not getting stronger, right? That's why people have to keep putting more and more weight on the bar, which is right and awesome and great. But if they would work on their internal stuff, then when they use that weight, sometimes I will not change the weight for 6 months on a lift because I'm changing. And if I change, the lift changes. And if the lift changes, then I can use that lift to change my body even more. Most people are trying to get their lift up. When I get myself up, when I show up to that lift, I'm a new person, which means I get beginner gains in whatever joint, muscle, tissue I'm training with that lift. I'm using the lift to get better at me, not me to get better at the lift, because then I'm going to accommodate and my body's eventually going to start to lose those capacities. I want you to think if you had a big ranch, right, with all this huge ranch and fences around the ranch. If you never went to the corners of your ranch and walked the fence, you wouldn't know if parts of the fence had fallen over or if weeds had grown in or if, like, let's say wolves, I don't know what wolves, right? So if you don't walk the perimeter of your property, you don't know the fences have fallen down. If you don't train at your end ranges, if you don't focus on your joints and your connective tissue, you don't know as you got your squat up to 400 that all that stuff is actually getting worse. So I can go and get my hip awesome, and I can stay at the same weight sometimes for 6 months. I've even done it for a year, and I just keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Because I'm a new person, beginner gains over and over again when I change my connective tissue, my internal environment, my muscular tissue. I have new stuff to train with. I have more oranges that have been unsqueezed, untrained tissue. Bam, boom. Let's go. Dude, if this doesn't make you hyped to train and just slam some high intensity stretches and some tendon stuff and some joint stuff, I don't know what will. It should get you hyped. It's like it's unlimited gains. There's finite gains in something like a bench press. There's infinite gains in connective tissue, muscular tissue, and joint rotation.
Yeah, I love it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I'm all. Yeah,
that's.
I just want to clap up some hip capsules and then go squat heavy. Like, what a great thing! You just smash your hip capsule into oblivion, and then the hip's like, okay, I'll give you more space. And then you're like, thanks, bro. And then you go drop in a squat and you load muscles that have never experienced that before. And then all of a sudden you're adapting while the person next to you is losing capacity and you're not even trying as hard. Not that you're not training hard.
What else you got,
I'm
dude?
pushing my limits internally, and my lifts externally push their own limits. I don't attempt to raise my limits. I let my limits raise themselves.
What more you got? Like keep them coming. You got all these sayings, dude.
Dude, the beet juice. The beet juice kicked in. It was a long work day, and I thought it was done there for a second. The beet juice revived me.
No,
I've got the glowing mic too.
And that's what's funny.
This is redemption for that mic issue. I swear, I'm going to get like 70 comments and I'm going to be like, you guys don't even know. I've got a glowing mic now. I'm now a podcaster.
That's right. You can get your own Twitch feed and everything.
Dude, people like, they're like, this isn't OnlyFans. And they see me just slamming the hip. Oh, yeah. People are like, what? Dude, tip capsule work, baby. Get access to space. Space is the final frontier.
That's right.
It is. It is. The one thing, right? As you get older, now when you're 20, this doesn't ever. You can get better at anything. I promise. If you and I, right, we're past our 30s. How do we continue to become badass and stronger? Most people are like, well, you're just going to taper off. You need access to more stuff.
Yeah, and there's plenty of stuff
you've been. If you showed me your squat and I said, how long have you been squatting with your toes out at 30 degrees in this stance this way? You'd probably say the past 20 years because you were coached 15, 20 years ago to squat like that. So those tissues have adapted long ago. So now they're detraining over time. So bam.
Yeah. So maybe I need to start doing that because I'm actually I'm a toe straight kind of guy.
Don't focus on changing the lift. Change yourself. Right. So once again, we have demands we place on our body, which are the biomechanical loads. And when we make training load errors, we're going to see injury. And that's the number one cause of injury. It's not because you overpronate. There's no single predictor of injury. They've studied 3,000 plus runners, multiple studies, top level coaches. There's no single predictor of injury. Okay. There's no magic muscle in rehab. There's no, if you get your tibial stronger, you're going to bulletproof your shins. Like a Glock will go straight through your shins. Right. So we modify the gait and we decrease the biomechanical loads. Then we focus on our capacity, which is specific tissues, bones, connective tissue. Connective tissue is tendons, but tendons have, kind of that tendons. We have the joint space, we have the nervous system, and then we have the different muscular tissue. And that is the stuff that is trainable in the body. And so when you go into the gym, you should be thinking, how do I expand my limits through those methods? Now, you're going to do all the squats, hinges, lunge, pushes, and pulls. But now you're thinking, what am I training here? And I bet you most people, if they're having issues in an area, if they were honest and looked through their past year of training, they'd be like, I'm not doing any joint work there. Or once again, they might be typing their answers in their math calculator, but they don't get the right answer. So if water doesn't get hot enough, it doesn't boil. So a lot of people will message me and say, Taylor, I'm doing this, this, and this. I'm like, those are great exercises. And people will get mad because I made fun of the knees over toes guy. And then they'll be like, no, what about Nordics? And I'm like, they're awesome exercises, but if it's the wrong intensity, if it's the wrong volume, if it's the wrong duration, if it's the wrong length, if you don't have the right prescription, you're not going to get the right effect, right? If I don't have the right dose of ibuprofen, if you take 5 milligrams of ibuprofen, it's not doing anything. So a lot of people they're like doing good exercises, but they don't know how to specifically train tissues. So then over time they train, pain goes away, but they never get better. And then they get stuck in rehab purgatory. You get injured, you stop training the thing that you injured. You do all this stuff to make you feel better, or you do stability exercises where you balance on a mat and you're like, look, I'm working balance. And then you stick a needle in it and then you're like, ow. And then you feel better. You ice it. And then you lose capacity. And then you return to the thing you're doing. And then eventually it goes wrong again. And you blame the running or your knee or your weak glutes. And you don't see that it's this vicious cycle. So I'm hoping people can break out of this cycle. Do not get stuck in rehab purgatory. All roads lead back to load. You have two options: train stuff and get better, or detrain and atrophy. You do not want to be an astronaut in space. Maybe you do. We have the Space Force. Shout out Space Force.
Yeah, we got Space Rangers now.
Yeah, that is awesome. and we barely scratched the surface, which is psychotic because we actually had a lot of time today to break it out. People are going to have so many questions off this. Like I didn't even touch like half the joint mechanics of the foot, the posterior tibialis, posterior pelvic tilt. But the whole point is, if you make it simple, if you're training something in those areas, you're improving, right? So, like I said, draw a circle. Ask yourself, am I doing stuff for the joint? And once again, just because you're doing these little floppy band joint mobility drills doesn't mean you're adapting the joint. It has to meet the specific measures of intensity, duration, volume, and all that. So if you say, well, I did a banded thing rotation for my shoulder because it doesn't move. Nope, that doesn't work that way. You're just warming up. Taylor, I'm training my connective tissue by doing bicep curls. That you're not training at length. You're not training to length under high loads for long periods of time. So sorry, that's not really going to build good quality connective tissue. That's not wrong, but it's not the answer you might be looking for.
You're not training what you're intending to train.
Exactly, which is the goal of training. You have to have right intent. And remember, the reason why everything works is because you have people with thousands of millions of followers who say, do this program. Then you have someone stop training what was hurting them. They decrease demands. They do these cool looking, the top 5 exercises for shin splints. And then they're like, my shins felt better. And then they went back to running. And then 10 weeks later, they get hurt again or in a different place and they can't connect the dots. And they would never understand that just because something worked for you doesn't mean something would have worked 10 times better. And just because you got out of pain doesn't mean you actually are making yourself more resilient. Most people are actually just decreasing demands.
Cool. Well,
yeah,
man,
I feel like, yeah, I mean, that's a great chunk of information that people should be able to take. And then, like I said, yeah.
Well, like you said, you're just scratching the surface. But so what we'll do is we'll start the next episode. If we remember, we'll talk about foot mechanics.
Yeah, that's important because once again, if the joint doesn't move, that's a problem, right? So now most people are going to have 3 to 4 problems in area because they're just training exercises. They're not training adaptations. Can you imagine, by the way, we do all this and we get the same mic quality? I'm going to put this out there, by the way, for everyone. I bought brand new wireless earbuds. I bought some Gucci ones and I bought some jobber ones. They were rated. So for all you haters out there who was like, oh, Starch can't even afford a mic. I bought brand new headphones for that. And Big Rehab wanted to take me down because Big Rehab wants you coming back for that spin cycle of, oh, okay, let's do some rehab exercises. Ready? Or prehab, my favorite. I'll end with this. Prehab, the word doesn't make sense. Ready? Rehab is gaining capacities that you've lost, and training is acquiring capacities that you don't have. So the word prehab doesn't make sense. Training is prehab. So when people are like, oh, these are my favorite prehab exercises, so you're just training. But now you're probably training at a low intensity, not adapting the tissue, and probably not actually making yourself more resilient or more tolerant to training load errors.
You just think you are.
So stop using the term prehab. I know it's cool. I know it's fun. Training is prehab. Prehab doesn't exist. Rehab is gaining stuff you've lost. Training is gaining capacities you don't have. Focus on building up your tissue tolerance and capacities for tissue-specific strength training, and focus on modifying the demands, not getting rid of them. The body thrives off of load and adaptation. If you remove load, you stop adapting.
The most important thing to know is that you are not suicidal. So if Big Rehab,
I don't foam roll.
So if you get suicided, it's Big Rehab.
Dude, they're going to take us down. I guarantee you, if you can't, we'll end on this. You won't believe how many people I've talked to. Oh, I had this issue, and then I was told to rest, ice, elevation, compression, NSAIDs. Getting out of pain is important. I don't want people to be in pain. Pain sucks. But remember, don't get stuck in rehab purgatory. So many people spend 10, 15, 20 years there, and they don't know why they can't get out of it. Now you're a little bit smarter, a little bit better, and this is just some wisdom from all the mistakes I've made. I've made so many mistakes when it comes to this, and I wish I could take a time machine back and go tell myself, hey, like, there's stuff that you need to do in training, because once again, running does not build up tendons. It doesn't build up right? If you're healthy, if you're a young kid and you're just starting running and jumping, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, right? You can do anything, run, jump, play, go play volleyball, basketball, you'll be fine. But running does a poor job of building bones, tendons, joint motion, connective tissue. So we need to use strength training not to magically prevent injuries, but to gain those adaptations so that we can train and run more. The goal is to run more. You want to get better at running? Run more. How do we run more? By managing our training volumes, but having the tissue capacity to handle those demands. Freaking get starched.
That's it. All right, everybody. Taylor, appreciate you joining us.
By the way, everyone should have been doing low intensity cardio while you listen to this. You just would have knocked out 2 hours, but you split this up. You're listening to this in your car right now. Go do cardio.
That's right. All right. Appreciate you joining us, everybody. Line up.
Well, guys.